It's sometimes hard to get design projects prioritized, but for a designer who can also code, you can just be like, hey, I built it. Like, what do you think? Like, we don't need to get engineering resources. We don't need to get buy-in. It's just like, do you think this is a good feature? Should we ship it? I'll ship it right now.
I'm Pulkit Agrawal, and this is the Product Lunchbox, the bite-sized series for product people. In less time than it takes for you to eat lunch, we'll share some distilled insights and tactics from an experienced product operator on a single topic per episode. Really excited to be joined by Nate Argosh today. Nate's a product designer, although has had a background in engineering at GE and even SpaceX, in co-founding and leading product at his own startup, Weather Optics. And then being a designer consultant at ThoughtWorks, and now a senior product designer at iTouch. And Nate's a product designer, but does a bunch of PM work. So excited to talk about that and designers taking on PM roles. I've posted and think that the roles are evolving and the boundaries are blurring. So we'll get into it. But welcome, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So just to get started, maybe set some context. What product work do you do as a designer?
Yeah, I think that there's obviously a wide variety of product responsibilities, but I think for me specifically, sometimes I find myself just like talking to customers to figure out what to build next, like given a vague problem statement or opportunity, like trying to figure out what exactly we should be building. And that might break down into like doing user research, writing specs and, sort of proposals. It might involve aligning team members from across the org to sort of buy into this vision of like this product that we should or should not build. And then ultimately like fleshing out requirements and writing specs.
So essentially you're doing a PM role, and it sounds like you're also doing a designer role. So you're kind of taking it from the problem statement all the way through to high fidelity visuals, I guess, in Figma or something. Is that right? Are you doing anything else?
Yeah, I think I flex from project to project, right? So like in some projects where like we have an established PM in that area, then maybe I'll just like sort of stay in my lane and like do mostly just design work. And then other places where like we don't have a product manager exploring a certain area, then I'll flex into some of those responsibilities.
A lot of people are concerned that when somebody stops being a specialist and ends up taking on more responsibility, like, product manager and designer, or designer and engineer, or engineer and PM, that it will reduce the quality of work because you're stretched too thinly. So are there things that you found that don't work well when you're PMing a project along with being the designer on it?
Yeah, I think that designers love to like build solutions, right? And so there's definitely a risk of jumping to solutions too quickly before you have strong conviction. I think that like one of the biggest things I've had to like teach myself is like to really pause and think and like really wait until you've built up enough conviction and buy-in from the team and the org that something is ready to move on to like more detailed design work. Yeah, right when I joined iTouch, I was working on a project where I was flexing into some of those product responsibilities. And I just found myself like jumping to mock-ups like really quickly and pitching design trade-offs like, oh, should it look like this or like that? And people were like, whoa, like we're not ready to build this yet.
Okay, so that's a really good point. So designers thinking about this should maybe spend a bit more time on validation of an idea or solution before we jump into visuals. Sometimes visuals can really help communicate the solution too. So, I understand the benefit of that. Beyond just having the intention to be more thoughtful about, finding a solution before getting alignment, before you get into design, is there been anything that you've done like systematically or anything, process change or any way to like change that behavior to avoid jumping into solutioning too quickly?
Yeah. One thing that I've been working on is like not committing to like a formal like PRD, like a product requirements doc right away, but rather like splitting up that like documentation and that like pitch into different phases. And so sometimes earlier on when like you're not actually really sure like what the shape of the product should be, just like pulling together some thoughts and like writing sort of like a business pitch. So thinking about like, hey, I'm thinking about this sort of solution. We have a little bit of evidence, but like let's talk about it and let's figure out if maybe this is something that we should move forward. So splitting up the sort of pitch into smaller, more bite-sized chunks that you can iterate on.
Great. So really, before you get into the specs of a solution, you're kind of pitching the high level solution and you're getting alignment from the other stakeholders before you get into like that kind of design phase. And maybe the way to do that is, maybe there's for any kind of ticket or whatever, like Epic or whatever you're using to track this, like maybe there's a stage for this piece of it of getting alignment on the solution before it. And then maybe that will help you kind of make the difference. Cool. I presume you were using AI tools, and that's one of the reasons that you're able to do more in the same amount of time. And so I'm curious if you found any specific unlocks from AI or tooling or any examples of things that you've been able to speed up your workflow around.
Yeah, definitely. So ChatGPT, easy answer, but like I'll share some specific examples that I've found interesting lately. One is I was writing a spec on like we were exploring how to measure this product that we're working on and getting into like some pretty complex sort of statistics, definitely out of my league. And so just like trying to use ChatGPT to like understand a complex space, right? Like explain it to me like I'm in fifth grade to understand like anomaly detection and like these different methodologies to do that. Another example is I was actually for that same spec that I was writing to prepare for like a product crit where I was going to get feedback from a bunch of product managers from across the org. I was asking ChatGPT to just like pretend like you're a product manager. And here's my spec. Like, what questions would you give me? I can't take that idea for myself. Somebody else in my company actually did that and shared that with me, but it was great. It gave me a bunch of like really real questions, like, why are we building this instead of something else? How is this feature integrated with the rest of the product? Stuff that I was able to sort of like preemptively answer to just like get that out in the open before the questions even came.
That's a great one. It's not necessarily a new one, but I think it's a good reminder that in addition to it being the first phase of feedback on a doc that you're writing, it's also a great first phase of feedback to a presentation you're about to give and to preempt the questions. And I think that's relevant, of course, in product presentations, but any presentation. I can imagine a founder pitching for fundraising or funding and then offering that and getting a bunch of questions back or what the risks are. So, and then you can be really well prepared for those objections, same for sales, etc. So yeah, great. And what about any other tools aside from ChatGPT? Anything else that you've discovered that you've been using regularly?
Specifically, like on the AI front? Yeah. I mean, obviously, like the call recorders are great. We were talking about earlier, like Gong and Grain, just like giving like action items and little interesting insight nuggets from customer calls. And then lately, we're working on like trying to figure out what like a customer insight repository might look like at High Touch. Something that we're actively working on. Yeah, we're exploring some tools like Monterey and Dovetail. There's a lot in the space, so still sort of sifting through.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's maybe start to focus on advice you want to give to other designers who are aspiring to take on more product work, and they may not have the same mandate that you have, but how can they be more useful working either with product managers or if there's a DART or PM resource, like how can they start to act in this product capacity? What are the kind of specific steps or tips that you give them?
Yeah. I think my first tip would be to not ask and just do it. When I started out at my first job at a consultancy, we were like building custom software for clients. In my first couple of projects, there was no PMs on my team. So it was just a designer and a bunch of engineers. And I think that's what like started to get me into like those like PM responsibilities, because I was like, oh, like there's nobody here to like make a roadmap. Like I should make a roadmap. And so I guess I was sort of forced to do it, but nobody was asking me to do it. So just jumped into it.
Yeah. Okay. So just get started with organizing, planning, prioritizing, maybe even get started with doing some customer research and validation. So that's a great one. Jump right in. And what else?
Yeah. Another one I would say is to work on your writing. Designers, I think, are uniquely visual thinkers and love to explore concepts and problems with visuals, but not everybody at your company is also a visual thinker. You have to keep in mind. And so learning to write well, I think goes a very long way to just like communicate with other people at your company.
Yeah. And I think like for me, like writing well, or, what does that mean? I think it means at least two things. One is structured communication. So start at the right level and then break it down, in hierarchy rather than like all over the place. And the second is being super succinct and reducing as much noise as possible. Like what's the thing to work on? Anything else that, comes to mind for you of like, hey, what does good writing look like? Or what types of writing should people focus on? Is commentary around your Figma spec? Is it Slack communication? Is it writing PRD docs? Like, what's your take on like what does good writing or writing well mean?
Yeah, a very designer approach to it is like design your spec for your user, right? And your user is like the people at your company. And so, yeah, I'll take like a spec, for example, like we use Notion. And so I'm writing a spec in Notion, and it's like empathize with your user, with your reader. Like, how are they going to consume this information? Like, is there nice little like expanded sections where they can like dig in for more information if they want, but like skip over it if they don't? Is there images in the right spots? Are the images not too overwhelming? Stuff like that. So design your doc for your users.
Yeah, and we use Figma a lot, and we put our specs in Figma directly. But I think that's another place where I think designers can get a little, it's easy just to assume everyone's comfortable with Figma. So like using cover sheets or using like, titling your artboards properly or making it very clear, like how to, go through a design. And I've really enjoyed when our designers have really put that structure outside of the design in place so that it's almost like for me, I had a background of like spreadsheet modeling or numbers modeling, and you have to design a model super well that it can be read by somebody else. And it's just a bunch of numbers. So can they follow the formula? Are there great labels for everything? Does it make sense? Do they know what they can adjust, what they can't? So in some ways, it's like, your Figma spec is your model, and how do you make sure it's easy to consume? One other thing I think for writing well, and I'll get your take on it, is I find that writing copy for the product is something that can also be something that designers maybe aren't as diligent about because they expect somebody else to like take the final responsibility for it. So that's something we're also working on as a team, is like, can the designers be ultimately responsible for the copy? And I think if you take that responsibility, you really need to know how to communicate, to the customer, what the terminology is, what they might be confused about, what they're looking for, what will resonate for them, what will be appealing to them, etc. So how do you do that? Do you end up doing copy, and how does that work?
Yeah, definitely. One tactic I like to use is go through and, you're doing like your high fidelity designs, and like go through and do your designs, and maybe don't worry too much about the copy. And then take a pause, come back and go through your designs and just focus on the copy, right? It can be kind of exhausting to try and work on like the visual details and the copy at the same time as you're going through, your work. And so just like coming back and putting on that different hat, it's like, okay, now I'm a copywriter. I don't know how to use anything else in Figma except for like text. How would I write out, all the copy?
Yeah, great advice. And what about like, if there is a case where there is a PM on the team, so you're working with a PM, have you changed what you do now, not knowing that, having experience being a PM or taking on more PM responsibility, do you operate differently, or do you kind of fall back into your traditional, designer role before this flexing that you started?
I think the first thing is to just like align on roles and expectations. Like when I'm working with a PM, like what do you want to focus on and what do you want me to focus on, and just aligning on that together. I do think that designers at High Touch are definitely like shifting left, I'll call it, as like the final mile details of like visual design become maybe just like a little bit more efficient with like design systems and like established patterns and AI. There's just like more time in the day to think about some of those like more product-y responsibilities.
Is there a automated way that you found to like get that polish, or is it more just like using your component library, etc., which makes it easier?
Yeah, I don't want to say that it's automated. Yeah, we've got a nice established design system, and even if folks listening don't have an established design system, like now there's tons of open source design systems out there that have like solved a lot of these like little nitty gritty details, and just you don't have to maybe focus on every little edge case of a button as much as maybe you used to.
Yeah. Okay. So designers are shifting left. PMs maybe shifting left. I've seen that in terms of PMs thinking more on the revenue side or more on the go-to-market side. I don't know if that's shifting left, but it's changing the responsibility. Have you seen that, or kind of what's your take on how the PM role is changing, as designers shift more into PM responsibilities?
Definitely. I think that's a great point. I'll give a couple examples of like recent projects and like sort of like what that breakdown of responsibilities looked like. Our PMs are definitely thinking more about like go to market and so and revenue. So it's like starting from like a very like business focused goal. How are we like, what's our strategy? Like what do we need to do to get there? And the PM's responsibilities at on a couple of recent projects ended with like a pretty vague problem statement or like opportunity statement. So it's like, we need a new homepage for our app, or users are struggling with making this new resource. They're struggling with the blank page. How do we solve the blank page problem? And then it's been up to the designers to like really take that fuzzy problem statement and like do the user research, do the speccing, figuring out what the product actually looks like.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's good to hear, because I think that's ultimately going to create better product, when you're a little bit more tied to the business problem, not just the customer or user problem. Okay. And then what about shifting the other way, maybe in a different axes around coding? Have you done any prototyping or getting closer to coding, or have you seen examples of designers doing that? I'm curious if that's also a trend that you're seeing.
Definitely. Yeah. I think there's like, in my mind, different archetypes of designers, right? Like you're starting to see some of those more strategic designers who are like flexing into PM responsibilities. And then I think you're also starting to see these like visual designers who are flexing into like the design engineer or like the visual engineer, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, we've got a designer on our team who has is shipping code all the time. It's a great way to just share a vision and a proof of concept. It's like sometimes hard to get design projects prioritized, but for a designer who can also code, you can just be like, hey, I built it. Like, what do you think? Like, we don't need to get engineering resources. We don't need to get buy-in. It's just like, do you think this is a good feature? Should we ship it? I'll ship it right now.
Yeah, the equation changes so much when there's like low engineering cost on something. And I think it gives more autonomy, to people, and maybe helps them see the pain of something, or the holes in their design solution as well. So I'm a big advocate. And I think my kind of summary message for folks in terms of how roles are shifting is that it's now time you can't just be a designer. You have to be a designer and X. And whether that's in the category of like, hey, I'm experienced in product management through research, through understanding business problems, through analytics, or I'm on the code side. I can code a front end prototype pretty easily. But I think, and I think the same applies for product managers. Like, you can't be a generalist PM anymore. I think you have to be a good PM, but you have to add on some other skill set that makes you special and unique, because I think that's what the market's going to respond. The market for roles is going to respond to. So, yeah, fascinating, super curious, yeah, super interesting, and I feel like I could talk a lot more about all this stuff, and it's interesting to hear you exhibit these changes high touch. So well done. Okay, couple of quick fire questions then. What are your go-to resources for learning about product?
Yeah, boring answer, but my coworkers are definitely the biggest one. It's like just learning from the product leaders at my company.
Is that passive learning, or like do you actively learn? Like, how do you actually learn from them?
It's a lot of passive learning, just like being in the same space, listening to conversations. I think my company is especially good about like people working out in the open. So lots of public Slack channels, lots of making sure every Notion doc is like shareable and findable. So just being able to see everybody's work. And then, yeah, also chiming in with questions. Like when I don't understand the thinking behind something, it's like, how did you arrive at this conclusion? Like explain your thinking here. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think it's one of those benefits that an open culture can bring. So encourage, it's one of the rules that we have is like work should happen in public channels so that everyone can find it and access it and share it later. So I encourage most teams to do that. Okay. And what about any favorite products right now? Any favorite tools?
Yeah. I, as a designer, like can code a little bit, but like not really. I love like low code and no code tools. So I've been really loving this tool called Toddle lately, toddle.dev. I think it's like one of the coolest, like most powerful front end low code tools I've seen out there. You can like really build any web app that you want. And then another one more on the back end side of things is called Xano. It's just like a sort of a low code SQL-lite back end tool.
Very cool. Can you spell those for the listeners?
Yeah, Toddle is Toddle, toddle.dev, and then Xano is Xano.
Okay, great. I haven't heard of those yet, so I'm sure I will. But there's such a variety of solutions that do those. But good pointers. I love discovering new tools. Great. Well, thanks for joining, Nate. Really appreciated it. I loved our conversation. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, how should they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Thanks for tuning in to the Product Lunchbox. Other episodes where I chat with current operators to get tactical advice include topics such as PMing data products, running product in a low meeting culture, designers as PMs, going from 1 to 10 in AI, and lots more. You can catch them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. If you have a question, topic, or a guest suggestion, then please look me up and DM me on LinkedIn. Thanks for your attention.